Well, thanks everyone for joining us. When we launched Operation Esto Perpetua in 2022, we knew we had our work cut out for us. Uh, Obviously, meth and fentanyl seizures have dramatically increased in Idaho and across the country, and we needed insight on how to turn this tide. That's why I asked the Citizens Action Group on fentanyl to go to Idahoans in their communities and do one thing: listen. They listen to heart-wrenching stories of Idahoans whose lives will never be the same after losing a loved one so suddenly to this potent drug. They listen to businesses and local leaders about the need to make our communities safe. They listen to law enforcement and first responders about the new dangers they face in their job. The Citizens Action Group and a law enforcement panel we formed through Operation Esto Perpetua helped us identify we needed a multifaceted approach. First, we learned we needed a significant boost in awareness and education around the dangers of fentanyl. Our Fentanyl Takes All campaign is working. More Idaho youth know about the dangers of fentanyl than ever before. Second, we learned we need to continue to push border security to fight back against the cartels and minimize the flow of their illicit drugs in our country and our state. Idaho has sent teams of state troopers to train and to act as a force multiplier to secure the border with our partners in Texas. We learned we need to better integrate information sharing between law enforcement, first responders, healthcare, tribes, coroners, and others to tackle the problem strategically. And partners at all levels are working better together than ever before. Fourth, we learned we need to continue to increase resources for mental health and behavioral health to prevent the tragedy. Over the past years, we've made historic investments in community resources for behavioral health. Operation Esto Perpetua has demonstrated that when you get the right heads together, we can form a strategic approach to a complex problem and help save lives. That's why I'm signing an executive order today to formally establish Operation Esto Perpetua in law. Only now I'm expanding its focus to include human trafficking in all its forms. Human trafficking is modern-day slavery. The cartels and other bad actors are taking advantage of our open border to manipulate and abuse the most vulnerable, including children. Through this executive order, we will reconvene our Citizens Action Group to gather information about the severity of the threats of both drugs and human trafficking in Idaho, as well as ideas to combat it and the needed tools. We will use the recommendation from this group to inform our budget and policy decisions going forward, and most importantly, to help save lives. With that, I have an executive order from the Office of the Governor. Whereas in my 2022 state address, I announced Operation Esto Perpetua to bring together law enforcement, lawmakers, local government, tribes, families, and the public in new ways with the goal to reduce the flow of fentanyl and methamphetamine into the state of Idaho. And whereas from the early work of Operation Esto Perpetua came the highly successful Fentanyl Takes All campaign, which metrics show had a demonstrable impact on how our young people and parents view and respond to the threat of fentanyl. And whereas, from the missions to the Texas border, troopers hone their skills at drug interdiction, which they have returned and implemented in Idaho. And whereas, the crisis at the border has only worsened since 2022. The surge in overdose deaths in Idaho is directly related to the proliferation of illegal fentanyl, which in nearly every circumstance originates outside of this country and comes to Idaho through the open border or through other weak points in our nation's defenses. And whereas a parallel problem of drug smuggling is human trafficking, while our vulnerable people are exploited or smuggled by bad actors to gain illegal entry into the United States or otherwise appropriated for illegal and immoral ends. And whereas I announced in my State of the State address this year that Operation Esto Perpetua would continue with an expanded mission to address both drugs and human trafficking. Now, therefore, I, Brad Little, Governor of the State of Idaho, by virtue of the authority invested in me by the Constitution and the laws of the State of Idaho, do hereby order that first, Operation Esto Perpetua is authorized to continue as outlined in this order. Second, the objective of Operation Esto Perpetua will be twofold: to combat the flow of illegal drugs into Idaho and to combat the scourge of human trafficking in all its forms, including sex trafficking, labor trafficking, human smuggling, and all other appropriation of vulnerable children and adults. Third, a Citizens Advisory Group is hereby created and will be comprised of the following: appointed by the governor, a representative from an Idaho Indian tribe, a mayor of a city, a county commissioner, a member of the House of Representatives, a member of the Idaho Senate, and any additional public members that I see fit to appoint. Ex officio members will be the Lieutenant Governor, the Director of the Idaho State Police, the Administrator of the Idaho Office of Drug Policy. Fourth, Citizen Action Group will gather information about the severity and the threat of drug proliferation and human trafficking in Idaho, as well as ideas on how to combat it and the tools needed to respond. The Citizen Action Group will hear from Idahoans about their personal experiences with the effects of drugs on Idahoans and Idaho communities, and where human trafficking issues exist in Idaho, and how to treat the victims of human trafficking and connect them with services to break the cycle of exploitation. Fifth, the Citizens Action Group will report to the governor its findings. That report will be delivered to the governor and reviewed with advisors drawn from Idaho law enforcement and service providers to make policy recommendation. In witness thereof, I have hereunto set my hand, caused to be affixed the Great Seal of the State of Idaho in Nampa, Idaho, says at the Capitol, in Boise on the 14th day of February in the year of our Lord 2024, the independence of the United States, 248th of the state of Hood of Idaho, 134th. Signed, Brad Little, Governor of the State of Idaho. Here we go. Questions?
Anybody want to start?
I have one. How much money has or will be invested into the mental and behavioral health?
Well, depends on how far you want to go back. When we put the Behavioral Health Council together, one of the first things they did, and that we're the only state, I think there's another state that's duplicating it, where the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch all are partners in establishing the priorities. The first thing we did was aggregate all the money that we're spending in the state on behavioral health, and it was somewhere over $250 million. They've made recommendations, but of course, I often tell people behavioral health challenges, we're doing great work. Behavioral Health Council making great recommendations. They're getting widely supported by the legislature, but it seems like and these people up here can tell you better than I, behavioral health problems are almost compounding logarithmically. The problems we have in our schools, the problem we have that law enforcement faces, the problems we have all over. And so even before the Behavioral Health Council, Governor Otter implemented the Crisis Center. We've got one here in Canyon County. We started on recovery centers. Now we've got they're ongoing funding issues, but now we're adding bolt-ons. This year, one of the biggest requests this year is for a secure mental health facility so that people that have these significant at-risk behavioral health issues, that we have a place to put them instead of having them incarcerated, which is not the right thing to do. But those are just the behavioral health recommendations. just continue to grow. That's the biggest one this year, is to literally build a facility so they're not incarcerated either in his jail or in my state prison system.
Yeah, I guess just one question for the two of you and the sheriff. Since your most recent visit to the border, is there anything new that you've kind of learned, and then also that you guys have talked about together?
Well, I haven't talked to the sheriff since I got back, but every time I go, what is so clear to me, crystal clear, is how the cartels are controlling the border. It's obviously not our government. It's not the Mexico government. It's the cartels. The adjutant general from Texas, in the briefing there were 15 governors there, people talk about catch and release. He says it's not catch and release, now it's mass surrender. They aggregate a lot of legitimate people that want to come to this country for a variety of reasons. Some of them say they're political refugees. A lot of them just want to get out of bad situations. They swarm them in a certain area, so all these nefarious things, either the importation of drugs or human trafficking, or people on the terrorist watch list, or criminals are coming elsewhere. They are manipulating those poor people to come across to overwhelm law enforcement. Governor Abbott, to his credit, and the people of Texas, has kind of got control at El Paso. They've kind of got control at Brownsville. I was at Eagle Pass. They went from 3,000 people a day to 3 people a day with all the work they're doing and the assistance that they're getting from other states and law enforcement. But now the problem is moving from Texas to Arizona, New Mexico, and California. The federal government still needs to act, but what Texas is proving is, with some help, the border of Texas is equivalent of from New York to Florida. That's how much real estate there is. And one of the things that became clear to me is these real exploitive crossings only happen in areas where it's somewhat urban. They got to have stash houses. They've got to have places for deterrence. The wide open ranges of Texas, either the existing border wall or electronic surveillance is doing a pretty good job, but it's in these communities, and that's probably what I learned the last time I was there, because I was going, Texas is kind of a big state. But Governor Abbott is pretty confident that with what we're doing with the help, and they really think in 90 days they're going to have the big leaky spots taken care of. But it really is, the cartels are overwhelming the border. Sheriff?
Thank you, Governor, and thank you for the question. The Governor is absolutely correct. You have to understand the complexity of the cartels. The cartels have infiltrated not just the borders and not just the southern border, but the northern border. And we are dealing with it from the entire interior of the United States. But their operandi, if you will, is, as the Governor said, flood one area while you extort another area. And now what we're seeing in Montana, what we're seeing in Vermont, what we're seeing in New York, Maine, is this overwhelming 700 to 800% increase this year alone of activity by the cartels pushing people through the northern border. It's great what Governor Abbott's done, but I was just in Arizona a few weeks ago on the Cochise County side, and they're inundated. They're overwhelmed because of that push over into the Arizona side, that rural country. But we're not just talking about our nearly 2,000 miles on the southern border. We're talking about nearly 6,000 miles on the northern border. And the cartels have figured it out. They're getting the people flown into Montreal. They're getting people flown into Vancouver, and they're using all of that space in between. Very rural area, and it's hard to stop them. But their push, they are the ones pushing the drugs and the humans across. But then, as the Governor has pointed out, then they're putting these people into indentured servitude in this country from the East Coast to West Coast, north to south. And that's what we're working a lot with through law enforcement, with HSI, with DHS, and all of our federal, state, and local partnerships trying to combat that. Very hard to identify and even harder to prosecute.
I may have missed this, and I apologize if I did. So the initiative was originally designed to curtail the fentanyl issue. You're expanding it now to human trafficking. Specifically, how are you going to address the human trafficking issue? What specifics are you going to do to get out in front of that?
Colonel, why don't you talk about
Sure.
that?
Well, thank you, Governor, and thank you for the question. One of the things that has made this Esto Perpetua, as the Governor spoke about, successful in Idaho is a collaboration. It's collaboration not just with law enforcement, but with our Office of Drug Policy, with our education, with everything in collaboration. And so expanding this will do the exact same thing as it relates to the human trafficking. So a big part of that, as the Governor spoke, we sent state troopers down last year to Texas to learn how to what they're doing there and how we can incorporate that here, specifically with the fentanyl and methamphetamine issues. We're going to duplicate that with the human trafficking piece as well, and send a team of state troopers here in the next little while to Texas to do the exact same thing. Because what we learn there is from Texas and what they're doing there that works so well, then we can bring it back here and not only implement it in the Idaho State Police, but share it with our counterparts, our city and county counterparts, so all of us become better at this. And so the human trafficking piece is the next phase in this. It'll be similar to what we've done in fentanyl. Go and learn what we can, come back and teach each other and learn from each other.
You've seen the fentanyl issue has expanded over the years. Has the human trafficking issue expanded in a similar fashion? And then where in the state? I mean, we're talking about Boise to Nampa. I mean, it's a big place and there's a lot of different demographics.
That's a great question, and it is expanding, and also our ability to recognize it has expanded. So while it's also expanding, our ability to get those people, these bad actors that are doing this, has increased as well. And I will tell you, it is in every county in Idaho. And it's not just with the sex trade, it's also with slave labor, and it's with using children to help traffic drugs. It's everything you can imagine that are horrific crimes that people are citizens here, and people that live within Idaho and call Idaho home are the victims of this crime. And that's why we're really appreciative of our governor giving us the tools we need, and to make sure that our elected officials continue to give us the tools we need so that we can continue to enjoy this Idaho way of life.
When the fentanyl issue first started, before the cartels perfected putting it into pills, it was mainly a powder. Fentanyl's been around for a long time, but it was there, and we were working on basically overdose deaths, opioid overdose deaths from our pharmaceutical grade problem. But when they perfected these pill mills, matter of fact, if you go to the DEA website and they show two piles of pills, the best looking ones are the cartels one. The pharmaceutical manufacturers, they don't have when they first started making these pills, they weren't very good at it. They are very good. These presses now that are making these pills, and I think somebody said their cost in some of these pills is as low as 50 cents. When you figure 7 out of 10 are lethal, and they're 50 cents, and you get somebody addicted to it, the obscene profits that the cartels are making, particularly if they can get people addicted to it, is just, and that's why we have to do something. We were working on overdose issues. We were working on basically pharmacy grade opioid and other painkillers that were a problem. But it was the advancement, and in fact the precursor drugs are all coming from China. They're exported from China to Mexico, where the cartels control it, but they really control this thing. But the availability of these pills is, and one of the things that we didn't have, and we've got one in every district now, is what do you call the equipment that does the detection?
X-rays.
Yeah, X-ray. Because when we first started, we started having our Operation Esto Perpetua that Lieutenant Governor Bedke was. We didn't even have the equipment everywhere when this first started. Now we have the equipment. The next probably logical step is we've got to be able to determine, and there's a lot of people working on this, the strength of it, because, and of course, silly me, I'm going, why would anybody produce a product that kills 7 out of 10 people? Well, if you've been taking fentanyl for any period of time, the amount of fentanyl it takes to get the same benefit goes up almost immediately. That 7 out of 10 number, and Marianne, you can correct me, is for, it's lethal for the first time user. The multiple time user, then it takes more and more fentanyl. And there's other problems with it, but it's the cheap pills. It's readily available, it's easy to transport, it's easy to hide. So we've been through, cocaine, coke, meth, all these other issues. This, to me, is by far the biggest problem we've ever had.
Yeah, one more. You mentioned earlier that the cartel controls the border on the Mexican side. What does that look like? What did you personally?
You want me to say it again?
What did you personally observe whilst in Texas?
Well, the fact that, I think the biggest thing is the fact that that park that we were at in Eagle Pass, where there'd been 3,000 people going across, all of a sudden there were 3. And we were looking right into Mexico across the river right there. But you can do it. And like I said, I think probably the biggest takeaway for me is it is not a problem everywhere. Where you've got wide open spaces, the Texas DPS, which is our state police, they've got these vans with all kinds of equipment and drones and technology. They can go out on those wide open spaces, and there's still going to be a little scampering back and forth, but it's literally this mass surrender and release that's the problem, because that is the diversion for these bad things. And everybody's paying the cartel. Almost everybody's paying the cartel to get across. And if you're on the terrorism watch list, if you're a convicted criminal, then you're identified, and you have to pay the cartels even more to get across.
Did you see any of those mass surrenders while there?
No, because they had it where we were. I saw it before when Colonel Wills and I were down there last summer, and we were seeing it taking place there. But in Eagle Pass, basically the demonstration is yes, and they've got all this razor wire and all kinds of resources, but Eagle Pass was identified as the biggest leak in the dam was right there at Eagle Pass. But Governor Abbott thinks that, in 90 days, they'll have all these major places kind of taken care of. But then the problem's just going to move to Arizona and New Mexico and California.
I just remembered one more. Have you heard any feedback from any of the state troopers that are down there?
So we're the next team that's going down will be going down in the next few weeks. We're working with Texas to determine that timeline. So we don't currently have any Idaho troopers down there. But I did meet last week with colonels throughout the United States and the states that are sending troopers down there. And Idaho's not alone in this. I know the governor said, I think there were 15 governors, sir, that were down there with you. And I'm speaking with those colonels to make sure that we get as united a front as we can. Because this is twofold. It's helping Texas, but also bringing that information back to help our problem here in Idaho.
How many troopers do you plan to send down?
We think we're somewhere between 10 and 14.
And some of my fellow governors, and I'm not being critical, they've kind of from a knee-jerk reaction, they just sent a bunch of them down there. The Colonel McGraw, who's head of the DPS, when I spent time with him last summer, he was very complimentary of the fact that Colonel Wills and our troopers work with them to where do we need some help, what kind of expertise, what do we need to do. There's been some criticism that some of the people have gone down there, it hasn't been coordinated, and in any kind of an operation like this, coordination is absolutely, you don't want people running into people, you don't want gaps being, and you also have to establish a chain of command, who's in charge. And so that dialogue between DPS in Texas and the Idaho State Police is critical for this to be effective. And it also, then they're very amenable to training our people. Last time we had drug interdiction, we also had our SWAT team down there that were helping, and they were learning some of the latest tracking techniques in a little hotter environment than they're used to working in Idaho. So.
Chief, I was wondering if you would be able to talk to, I know that you've been with the department for 40 years. Your whole career. Let me I'll put that.
Well,
I just wanted
exactly.
to ask,
For a
what
while
have you
now.
seen change in the community in your time here? And, what do you think about the benefit of being able to learn more of these skills to bring back and train other officers?
Sure. Well, it's like everybody's mentioned this morning, or this afternoon, it has changed dramatically in the last 30 years that I've been here, and I think a lot of it comes down to, like the Colonel said, and it's education. We're talking more, we're communicating more. I think it's super important, that Governor Little and Lieutenant Governor Bedke do things like this, give us the tools like Colonel Will said, where we can, just because you're in Nampa, it doesn't mean, I can't help out ISP or Meridian or Caldwell. And, as quick as Idaho is growing and as many people, the influx that we've seen here, a lot of this comes down to partnerships. Sheriff Donahue and I, we speak weekly. What are we doing at Nampa that's going to help you and, try to eradicate those problems out of here. Specifically, with human trafficking that we're talking today, I can tell you 30 years ago, human trafficking was around, but it wasn't, I guess it wasn't as prevalent. I don't want to say we ignored the problem, but we weren't educated in it. And now we become educated as part of the training that our new folks go through. We address the problem, and I think the state of Idaho is doing a great job with it. Obviously, there's work to do. There's bills going through the legislation right now to try to strengthen that. And I know that the governor and lieutenant governor and those up here with me today support that. So hopefully we see some strong bills come through the legislature this year, so we can keep fighting crime.
I guess that's kind of what I'm looking for on the human trafficking front. Like, we're talking about growth in that area, but I want some sort of quantifiable thing. Maybe you can't provide that, but it's in every county. How much growth have you seen? The chief just said 30 years has been. Can you quantify that? Can you does it make sense what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah, the question makes sense, and the answer is we don't have a quantifiable. Right now, we don't have. We think we will have as we progress here, but we're just starting to learn about this problem and how to combat this problem in a better way than we've done in the past.
May I?
Yeah, please, Sheriff.
The quantification is hard, but what we are seeing is an increase. Chief Huff has a great team here in Nampa PD working, concentrating on that. We're seeing more and more cases. We're seeing more and more victims come into our law enforcement facilities, possibly on one crime, whether it's drug trafficking or whatever, but then we realize these people are being trafficked, being humanly trafficked, whether it's sex crimes, where it's pushing the drugs, you name it, they're being trafficked. And so that's the difficulty. We're seeing more and more of these crimes, and we're having to certainly address the criminality, but we're also having to treat them as victims because they are victims of human trafficking. And so there's a steep shift in how we're addressing this. And all this information is coming in almost like a tidal wave. And so when you look at the cartels and the nefarious actors that are out there, whether they're a construction company, a landscape company, a hotel chain, where they're working with the cartels to bring these people in, living in squalor, 20 to 30 people in a house. That's what some of our investigations are showing. All foreign, all illegal aliens, but forced into indentured servitude for a number of labor aspects. This is a growing problem, and the cartels are getting that money because these people owe them for getting them across that border. So this is not a small thing. This is an all hands on deck, and I applaud the governor and lieutenant governor for bringing this forward, and of course the colonel and our partnerships. That's you have to understand these people, even with the drugs that the governor talked about. Once the cartels are getting those chemicals in these people's bodies, they're not only making them work off the drugs that they're getting, they become addicts. That's more and more money back to the cartels. And they expect, according to DEA, a 20 to 30% loss in their consumer base by death. They expect that, but if they can get 100 million people on Snapchat to order those drugs and be sent out, their consumer base widens. This is an incredible, difficult situation we're under.
And you have one?
Just a question, perhaps for the sheriff or if anyone else wants to answer. On one point, I've heard from just the concerns from Idahoans that people are overwhelming the border. It's kind of changed the culture of Idaho. Just can you speak to one, the concern of the people in Idaho, their concerns, but also why would the cartel want to overwhelm the border? And does that kind of play into just kind of answer those kinds of things?
It is. When you go down there, it's abundantly clear. There's 2,800 border patrol. Texas alone has way more people than that involved. And in essence, they're processing. That's all they're doing is processing. So if you've got your patrol group there, all occupied processing, if you want to smuggle drugs or human trafficking or people on the terrorism watch list or criminals, you just create a diversion. And that's why, it's mass surrender and release. And when that mass surrender is taking place, all the resources are tied up, all the emphasis is there, and then all this other bad stuff's taking place. And it just kind of magnifies itself. And I asked, when I was down there the first time, I asked one of the DPS from Texas, I says, so the cartels know everybody that's getting close to the border. I says, how far into Mexico do they go? And they said, Governor, they go clear down into Latin America and even South America. When they see these big groups, there's some master planner somewhere saying, we're scheduling them to be here at this time to create this kind of a diversion so we can do this bad stuff here. And it was interesting when Speaker Johnson, the U.S. Speaker of the House, and that big congressional delegation went down there, the cartels didn't, and there was a lot of media there, they just shut the border off. There was nobody there the day they got there because that's how much they control the border. These people are not going to go across unless they get, there's a few of them that scamper across, but almost all of them have written a check. One of the media groups that were there when I was there a week before last was from Turkey, because Turkish refugees are coming to, and these might be legitimate political refugees, but they see this opportunity as a way to where they can come in and basically they get a sheet of paper, and that sheet of paper says, you got to show up for a court date in 2031. Welcome to the United States. There's a process where we are not going to get to you until 2031. Well, you can imagine how dispersed they're going to be by 2031.
Lieutenant Governor, I was wondering, just to bring it back to the Operation Esto Perpetua, I know that you really were part of that entire initiative, and I wanted to know if you could speak to your experience, what you heard from different communities around the state, and why you think it's important that we formally establish this.
Well, I'm assuming most Idahoans was like I was 2 years ago. We were aware at a distance, but we did not know the details of how pervasive, how dangerous, the need for coordination. We were kind of caught flat-footed as a state. And so that 0 to 60 experience that I had as we were going out into the various communities with Esto Perpetua it floored me, frankly. If I'm being honest, I had no idea that it was that bad, and it is. And now, and so I think that the good news is that there's a realization of how serious this is at the legislature. That's code for money should be coming, and to continue this coordination here. But you can't kick that can without, these are not siloed crimes. When you start investigating fentanyl and everything around it, then it becomes very obvious that there's a human trafficking element to this in all of its ramifications, paying off the original coyote or whatever we call them nowadays. That's to get across, and then address the addiction problems that happen there as well. It's big, it's real, and we need to get on top of it. That's what I take home from it.
And since we're in Canyon County, one of the things that the four of us heard at Operation Esto Perpetua is here in particular because of the decriminalization in Oregon. It's gotten to be because they literally, as a matter of fact, that was it the chief from Fruitland that was talking about getting phone calls from the Ontario police about we can't arrest them. The possession is not that we've decriminalized possession, and they're coming across. But then you've got, and the problem they've got in Oregon is a lot of our technology, Colonel's drug dogs, isn't applicable over there. They've got their law enforcement, the good people, men and women in law enforcement in Oregon got their hands tied behind their back because of the decriminalization. And it's a problem for Idaho because of our nexus.
And I think we have time for one more question.
I got one. have you heard or had conversations rather with the Oregon governor on what we're seeing here?
Well, actually, I had more conversations with Kate Brown, the previous governor, than I have with Tina. I'll see Tina next week. But they know where I am. But the legislature right now is discussing whether to unwind that. It's got quite a bit of momentum, but I mean, the genie is out of the bottle over there. They can't stuff it. They've got so many people that are addicted over there, and then what do you do for law enforcement if you can't arrest somebody when a dog hits or you see something? They've got to unwinding that. That decriminalization is going to be and that we've done the right thing here in Idaho, other than have our state next to Oregon.